These tiny fish are a big deal in the food chain. So much depends on anchovies, sardines, and other forage fish. They need more respect.
You got a fish on? Yeah.
Water quality is our lifeblood. It is critical to our success.
In a spectacular landscape around Olympic National Park, local residents want more wilderness to protect their clean water. In America's heartland, after the corn crop is harvested, there's another valuable crop to bale for the biofuel market. And fire ants, how the rapid spread of a biting invasive pest has been assisted by humans.
Fire ants have a lot to teach us.
We're all fired up for this edition of This American Land. Funding for This American Land provided by the Weiss Foundation, the Pew Charitable Trusts, and the Turner Foundation.
Hello and welcome to This American Land. I'm Caroline Revelle.
And I'm Bruce Burkhart with some great stories for you today about the conservation of America's natural resources and about the people dedicated to conservation. Today we start in Oregon at the mouth of the Columbia River on the Pacific coast, where researchers are studying the role that forage fish play in the food chain. Forage fish, sometimes called bait fish, are sardines, anchovies, smelt, and other small fish that are vitally important in sustaining larger species, including seabirds, salmon, and marine animals like sea lions. Humans also catch forage fish, mainly for animal feed, and there's growing concern that large-scale commercial harvesting of forage fish comes at the expense of other marine life, potentially with catastrophic results.
Forage fish are the small pelagic species, anchovies, sardines, herring, that all the larger fish and birds and mammals feed upon. These are northern anchovies, the major food source of almost every major predator on the west coast up here. That's a zero-age anchovy right there. This is an older one, probably it might be just a little over 1, maybe 2 years old. They don't live very long. This is it. This is buoy 10, just right over there, about 100 yards behind us. This really signifies the beginning of a 15-mile-long fishery and the beginning of the journey for salmon as they come back upriver. And we always hear about their journey down to the ocean, but what we don't hear much about is what happens when they get to the ocean and spend that 3 to 4 years. That's the time that they're growing and really dependent on a strong forage base. That's why when you put a salmon on a grill, you'll see that oil coming out of it. That oil is all from forage fish of some sort or another. My name is Bob Emmett. I'm a fish biologist for NOAA Fisheries in Hammond, Oregon. We've seen this around the world when these eastern boundary currents all of a sudden are not productive, and then you have a crash in the forage fish. And when that happens, you have starving birds, marine mammals that aren't being fed well, and they'll be starving. You have the salmon runs will just decline. So everything crashes if the forage fish are not there. So you see how that angle is?
Yeah.
That's what's going to give it that crippled fish look when we rig these up out in the water.
We have two main concerns about forage fish, and the first involves those species that are under active management now. And in many cases, that management is not perfect, and so we're working to improve it. You got a fish on?
Yep. Coming right towards the boat. Let's get the net, Tom.
The other main concern we have is that there are a lot of important forage fish species that are less familiar to the public and that even marine scientists and managers don't have very good information on. It's the mouth you look at, right?
Yeah, see, that's a black mouth.
Black mouth.
So that was a Chinook salmon, a small Chinook. It was a hatchery fish, but too short to keep, so that fish lives for another day.
You'll literally see thousands of boats out here all going for the same thing, and that's salmon. And interestingly, if you see a flock of birds which are looking for the same thing we are, they're looking for the bait fish.
Oh yeah, excellent. There's our target species. Right there. That's our murre! One of the research projects that we have going is we're looking at what these predators are eating, which species of fish they're relying on as their food source. So here we're sneaking up on a group of feeding pelicans, feeding brown pelicans here. Understanding what these animals are using as their food base helps us understand what makes that whole ecosystem tick. Once we have the bird safely in the box, we're gonna radio on the boat, let them know we're coming back, and then we'll tie up. We'll hand the bird over to people on the mothership here. Yesterday evening, we took one of our vessels out for a scouting trip to see if our target species, common murres, were in the lower estuary. We saw a few birds. However, after the sun went down, we were unable to locate these birds in the estuary around the Columbia River. So here's a common murre right after it's been captured. You can see it's already been very cooperative and regurgitated several small fish here, which look to be like a mix of anchovy and possibly smelt. This is a non-lethal technique to get stomach samples. Birds naturally regurgitate their stomach contents to feed their chicks. It's a safe procedure that has been used in a number of different areas. These are the stomach contents from one common murre captured off the Columbia River. This looks like primarily anchovy remains. I can see at least 6 different tails or vertebral columns. Here you can see the bones from an anchovy where the flesh has been digested away. The rest of these fish are a bit fresher. They still have flesh on the tails. We have digital images of bones from fish, and we can compare the images where we know the identification of the fish to determine what fish we have in our sample. Commercial fishers and sport fishers are starting to understand how important these fish are to supporting wildlife and healthy fisheries. So we are trying to bring awareness of the role of these fish in the food web so that people can properly manage these populations.
So how's the fishing been, Bob?
Been a good year.
My name is Norm Ritchie. I'm with the Association of Northwest Steelheaders, and I've fished down here in the Astoria area since I was a teenager. Well, you can see right behind you here millions upon millions of dollars in boats and other equipment. That drives a huge economy here. A lot of these boats are built specifically for fishing, and they're built here in Oregon and the Northwest. That's what people are spending their money for, is the opportunity to come out here, enjoy the outdoors, and catch a fish or two. 1, 2, 3, 4. Sport fishermen and commercial fishermen for salmon and tuna and that sort of thing are on the same page on this issue. We need to protect those fish to at least understand the timing and the size of the populations and know that we can take them at certain times in certain numbers without harming our salmon, steelhead, tuna, and other larger fish.
We're by no means saying let's not fish forage fish. What we're saying is let's make sure we do it in a way that allows for a healthy ocean at the same time as meeting the needs that we have.
Everybody wants those forage fish because that's the natural prey for all these fish, and that's what they eat. And so if you want to catch those on a hook and line, then you want to put an anchovy on your hook.
Caught here this morning about a 20-pound upriver bright Chinook salmon. And here's where the adipose was. That's clipped off. That tells us it's a hatchery fish, and we can harvest these without impacting the wild runs. So it's a win-win for all of us. Can't wait to get this on the kitchen table.
Our next story keeps us on the West Coast, farther north in the state of Washington, right up against the Canadian border on the Olympic Peninsula, where spectacular Olympic National Park is the centerpiece. There's now a bill in Congress that would add more protection to the forests and watersheds around the park. And there's wide support for the proposal among people who live there. We sent a crew to the peninsula to find out why.
The Olympic Peninsula is one of the last great places in the United States. People come here for the recreational opportunities. People come here for the stunning beauty. And people live here because of the clean water. My name is Michelle Sandoval. I am a Port Townsend City Councilor and former mayor. We reside at the end of the road. You have to want to come here. You have to want to live here. And with that desire brings people who are very passionate about the place that they've found. You don't end up here by accident.
The Water Olympics campaign is a proposal concerned with protecting our wilderness and the rivers. We have incredible public support for it. We have over 450 businesses, elected officials, faith leaders, and over 10,000 supporters have signed our petition. The reason we want to protect the wilderness and the rivers is because this is one of the last areas in the entire country with old-growth forests. The opposition is fearful that this proposal will prevent them from getting timber jobs, which it won't, because these areas are already off limits by Forest Service rules.
My name is Fred Rakovich. I'm a retired logger, and I live in Elma, Washington. I consider myself as an environmentalist and a retired logger, and I was an environmentalist when I was a logger. In terms of the old growth left in the National Forest, there's not a lot left because a lot of it were logged before now. There was a time when logging was right across streams, disturbing the spawning beds, all kinds of things that we did that were wrong. But we learned as we went along.
My name is Peter Bales, and I'm a fish biologist and director of Northwest Watershed Institute. One of the fun things I get to do is walk up the creeks to monitor for salmon. There's not many fish out here right now because the flow is still pretty low. And in a couple weeks or a month when it rains, that's when most of the coho will start coming in. And chum salmon. Well, the Olympic Peninsula was settled by Europeans rather late. Of the 48 states, it was probably one of the latest areas to be colonized. And so people think it's this pristine area, but actually since about the 1890s, salmon runs have been heavily impacted by overharvest and development of the floodplains for agriculture and heavy timber harvest in the National Forest, in the Olympic National Forest. So we're still recovering from 100 years of impacts in the Olympics.
Well, this inlet is called Little Skookum, and very important area for shellfish farming in Puget Sound. About 80 years ago, there was a pulp mill that was located in these inlets, and it polluted our waters, it devastated our industry, and after it closed, it took about 40 or 50 years for these shellfish farms to recover. If the legislation passes, my understanding is that the logging and road building will not be allowed in some of these watersheds that are above the shellfish growing areas, and that will help ensure the water quality around our farms.
So where are you going to go? Are you going to go out to the lighthouse? Yeah, you could paddle downtown and stop at the pizza.
Thank you.
Yeah, you bet. Have fun. I picked Port Townsend because it's on the waterfront, and this harbor that we're in here is a really rare event. There are very, very few small harbors like this left anywhere in the United States that aren't completely developed and haven't gone, beyond the reach of small businesses that are manufacturing based. My business isn't based primarily on tourism, but on recreation and outdoor recreation. So for me personally, preserving outdoor recreation is a good thing. Well, you're still dry. That's a good sign.
Over the past decade, millions of dollars of state and federal money has gone to protect and restore salmon habitat in these low elevation watersheds. And the Wild Olympics campaign and the effort to protect the headwaters of these river systems in Hood Canal is really important to protect that investment in all this work we're doing at the low elevations.
What it will do is it will make these Forest Service rules permanent. Not just for now, not just for myself, but for the future.
The city of Port Townsend has 38,000 acres of federal forest land, which will be protected. That's our watershed. That's what creates the pure drinking water that we live with here, that we have the beauty of living with here. And the campaign will make sure that that continues into the future.
Water quality is our lifeblood. Without it, we can't harvest our product won't grow, it won't thrive, and so that is critical to our success.
I've been to Europe, I've been to Russia and other places, and this is really something we need to protect and cherish.
Last season, we started reporting on second-generation biofuels, starting in Tennessee and Iowa with a look at fast-growing grasses like switchgrass. They can be grown as renewable cellulosic energy crops to be fermented into ethanol. We're following more stories on those new biofuels, and we'll take you now back to Iowa, where farmers are discovering there's a growing demand for the residue in their cornfields: stalks, leaves, husks, and cobs left on the ground after the corn is harvested. That residue, it's called corn stover, can also be converted into fuel. It's the first round of the Iowa State High School football playoffs. And here in Emmetsburg, a small town in northwest Iowa, the high school team, known as the E-Hawks, is taking it on the chin. The rain, which farmers around here could have used a few months earlier, is making things worse. Part-time assistant coach Bruce Nelson brings a little bit of experience to the job. He was a star football player here at this same school, then walked on at the University of Iowa, where he went on to become an All-American before being drafted in the second round by the NFL's Carolina Panthers. Injuries shortened his career, so he came home to the family biz, raising corn, and then started a brand new business. Baling corn stover, that leftover residue in the field after the corn is harvested. Used to be it was either left there and plowed back into the field before the next planting, or was baled up for livestock feed and bedding. But now there's a new use for it, making biofuel, specifically ethanol. So why don't you tell somebody about why corn stover is a good thing?
Because there's a vast abundance of it. It's renewable. We can grow this every year. You know, we're gonna do it anyways, right? We've been doing this for, hundreds of years growing crops. We grow this crop every year, so this stover is gonna be here. And so we might as well process it and make something even more useful out of it.
When you think about ethanol, you think about ethanol from corn. That's the primary crop that we use here. Cellulosic ethanol uses different kinds of biomass as a feedstock for ethanol. So in our case, we're going to be using crop residue, corn cobs, husk, some stalk.
Poet, one of the largest ethanol producers in the country, has teamed up with a Dutch biotech company, DSM, in a unique venture called Project Liberty. Next door to the corn ethanol plant is their new cellulosic ethanol plant under construction, expected to start operations in 2014.
One of the challenges in getting cellulosic ethanol is your feedstock. You need a lot of it. Here at the plant, we're going to be processing 770 tons of biomass per day. And so how do you get that much material into a plant? Well, with our process with stover and ag residue, the unique thing about that is that it's already being grown.
Being grown, yes, but for farmers to make it profitable, they need more efficient methods for that second harvest, collecting the stover. That's where Eric Woodford and his invention come in.
This is called the powered wind guard. So this is the part that I invented and have a patent on. So these impeller blades spin and help drive the top of the windrow into the baler. So it helps the farmer get more yield and it helps him harvest the yield faster. We're going to use a lot less fuel because we'll be able to harvest more tons in less time. So then we're using less diesel fuel through the tractor, so that reduces our carbon footprint. This method of harvesting really is key to sustainability, because if you look out across this field, there's still a lot of residue out here. So as far as wind and water erosion, that's not going to be an issue here. So we're really particular on how we harvest so that we're not going to have a devastating effect on the soil.
There's really a snowball effect to this whole thing. I mean, you got the Eric Woodfords who are, they created a dealership. Those guys have a lot of jobs they have going there to keep this equipment going. And the guys like me, we buy the equipment and we're making money using their equipment as well.
For relatively young men like Bruce and Eric, this is not only a way to breathe life into rural economies. For them, it's also the right thing to do.
My wife and I made the decision that we would sell our farm and sell our baling business and move to Iowa because we wanted to lead by example, to show our children, you know, mom and dad are going to do something to be involved in a clean energy future.
Because I don't want to do something that's bad. You know, you don't want to start a business based on people, you know, you're hurting the earth or you're putting people out of jobs. I mean, there's not a lot of bad things about this.
And this former football player who saw his team at Iowa progress from a losing 1-10 record in his freshman year to 11-2 in his senior year says it's a lot like his baling business.
We stunk at the beginning. We were 1-10 my first year. We were bailing up bad bales. We were putting them in the wrong spot. We were hauling them the wrong way. We were doing everything the hard way, and we were working hard. We worked really hard when we were 1-10 in football, and I worked really, really hard that year in baling, and nothing came to fruition. You know what I'm saying?
And this year, he's hoping his baling business goes 11-2. So next year you go undefeated.
Well, and then my that's funny you say that because my rookie year in the NFL, we went to the Super Bowl. So I'm thinking next year we're going to the Super Bowl, baby. Super Bowl or bust.
And the same might also be said of this very young cellulosic ethanol industry. A few rookie mistakes along the way, but shooting for the Super Bowl of a sustainable energy future.
When we think about fire ants, those biting and invasive pests, most of us just want to know an easy way to eradicate them. But scientists say they can learn a great deal from studying the social structure of these insects. As Miles O'Brien explains in our Science Nation report, the widespread success of fire ants is made easier when humans disturb natural areas with roads and development.
What we have here is an example of medium-sized fire ant colony, right adjacent, interestingly enough, to a native species.
Fire ants can be a nuisance, and their stings can be painful. Just mention the name, and many folks will reply, how do we get rid of them? University of Central Florida entomologist Joshua King says, not so fast.
Fire ants have a lot to teach us, as do these ecosystems.
With support from the National Science Foundation, King and biologist Walter Chinkle from Florida State University studied the ants as an invasive species and also their social structure.
This colony was planted about a week ago, and there they are, doing well.
King and Chinkle are what they call ant gardening in the Apalachicola National Forest.
In this experiment, we have created different kinds of environmental conditions. We have shading, and we have tilling the soil, so it's a disturbance.
It allows us to come in and keep track of who survives, who doesn't.
Invasive fire ants thrive in disturbed areas, land that's been plowed for farms or cleared for roads and development.
There's really quite a bit of growing evidence that land use change is one of the, if not the underlying reason for this increase in exotics.
For decades, efforts to eradicate fire ants on farms and ranches did nothing but move them around.
Chemical control of fire ants, it's expensive, it's usually inefficient. The fire ant was one of the species that sort of changed our view about how we can deal with insect pests, and it shifted our view from eradication to management.
King says simple changes like eliminating central soil depots for road projects can limit the spread of fire ants. King's team in Orlando studies ant and termite colony development.
This complex social structure yields amazing ecological results. So when we talk about termites and ants, we're talking about some of the most abundant organisms on Earth, breathtakingly abundant.
And that, he says, is worth paying attention to.
Now, here's a quick look at a story from our next show.
Gained a little weight since the last time she wore this saddle. Big chunks of intact ecosystem are becoming increasingly rare in the West, and this is one of the last and certainly the biggest left in the lower 48.
Thanks for watching. And remember, you can catch us anytime on thisamericanland.org. We'd love to hear your comments and ideas for stories you think we should cover. We'll see you next time.
For more information about this program, visit thisamericanland.org. Funding for This American Land provided by the Weiss Foundation, the Pew Charitable Trusts, and the Turner Foundation.